Hey everyone, sorry, I'm pretty sure I've just been talking to an empty room for the past 10 minutes because I realized I wasn't actually live. I was streaming to YouTube, but I was not, in fact, live on the channel. Whoops, that was weird. Um, and it looks like. Let me see. So, is anyone here in the chat? I know things were just kind of weird with my streams, so people might have been kicked off or the link might have changed. So is anybody here? It appears that people may not be here. So let me try and figure that out. Really sorry for delays and such today. I got some new equipment in, which actually makes doing everything a lot easier. So we're going to see if I can. Anybody here? Make everything work. All right, so we got at least a couple people here. Awesome. I have a feeling the link to my live stream changed, so let me make sure that I actually have the right one posted. Yep, it's different. Okay. So the live stream link actually changed, so I'm going to go ahead and just give everybody a couple minutes to just get in, because the previous link I posted is not correct anymore, because it's really hard to do YouTube streaming, apparently. I feel like I should be better at this. But I also just got a sweet new dock for my laptop, which is something that I've needed for a while to use dual monitors. So I'm really excited, and I have everything plugged into it, and it works great. So I'm actually just really excited about that. And yeah, there's a bit of a delay. Oh, okay, cool. So as long as that link works, that's fine then. So yeah, I think we're probably just good to get started then. So let me. Okay, cool. So yeah, let's get started. So this is the third lecture in the series about, it's just an introduction to Python programming. Just trying to get people up and running and get people to the point where they can build a project and understand kind of like the some of the inner workings. And today I'm going to cover a little bit more about the Python language itself, things that I have missed, and then at the end I'll have you guys work on a programming assignment. So last time we covered lists, so that includes creating, accessing, modifying, iterating through lists, and while loops, for loops, and just loops in general. So let me pull it up. Sorry, I'm still trying to configure everything. Okay. I think that should be good. Yeah. Awesome. So I'm going to have everybody start off just by doing a practice problem. So in this problem, you're going to write a function that takes in a list of numbers and a value as a parameter. The function is going to return true if the value exists in the list of numbers and false otherwise. So give this one a shot. So the idea is that if we have list of numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and then we pass in list of numbers and 5 into the function, we're going to print true because the element does actually exist in the list. And then if we pass in 2, the method is going to return, or the function is going to return false because 2 is not actually present in that list. So give this one a shot. Use PyCharm, repel it, whatever you'd like, and then give you a couple minutes to do that, and then we can go over the problem. Let me just put on some chill streaming music real quick. And yes, I have to agree that dual monitors are pretty much the only way to go. It's actually been a huge challenge to even do my full-time job without dual monitors, which seems really, it almost seems like bougie in a sense, but really it's actually pretty useful, especially when you're coding. Okay, I'll turn the music down. Okay, would somebody like another minute to work on this? Okay, so the way one way you can solve this is just to use a for loop, and you can say for value in list of values. So essentially, value is going to look at every value in the list. Oh, okay. Sorry. So I'll go through this one. I have a second practice problem. The next time I will actually give you some more time to work on it. So sorry about that. But if like one way you can solve this is just say for value in list of values, if the value that you're looking at in list of values as you're iterating through is equal to value to find, you've returned true. And then if you get out of the for loop without ever returning true, you return false. So one mistake I would generally see with problems like this is people would say, if value equals value defined, return true, else return false. So really you actually want to, so if you do that, you're going to end up just exiting the loop immediately if you don't find the value. So you actually want to wait until you're outside of the for loop to return false. And that's kind of like the default case. So let me give you another practice problem. I'm going to give you, I'll actually give you 5 minutes to work on it. Maybe I'll just put a timer up. I think that's probably a good idea. I'm sure if I Google online timer that something useful will come up. And it turns out it did. Amazing. The wonders of modern technology. Nice. All right. So let's look at the second practice problem. For this one, I want you to write a function that takes in 2 lists as parameters. Did you need to define value, or is that a Python feature? Okay, so basically the way this is working is def indicates that you're defining a function. In this case, the function is called value exists in list, and then we're passing a list of values, and we're also passing a value to find. All of these words are just words I made up. So if you're kind of confused about whether like something I'm writing is like a Python keyword or like something that already exists in the language or it's something that I made up, anything that's going to be white text is something that I made up. And we're actually going to talk about this. This is called an identifier, and we're actually going to be talking about identifiers a bit more today. So words like def and print are actually Python keywords, and they mean a very specific thing. So if it's blue, you can assume that it's a Python word, and then if it's a white, you can assume that it's just something I made up. And then this light green is just like values, like numbers, and then anything in dark green is a comment. And we'll also talk a bit more about comments today as well. Hopefully that answered your question. If not, just let me know, and I will try to elucidate some more. So practice problem number 2. I want you to write a function that takes in 2 lists as parameters. So the function returns the sum of the list with the maximum sum, which is kind of a weird way to write the problem now that I'm looking at it, but it's... let me try to explain what I'm looking for. So let's say we have these 3 lists. Lists of, we have list number 1, list number 2, list number 3, and then we want to get the maximum sum of 2 lists that we pass as parameters. So the sum of this one is 8, the sum of this one is 12, the sum of this one is 27. So if we pass in list 1 and list 2 into maximum sum of 2 lists, we're going to get 12 because the sum of this one is 8 and the sum of this one is 12. So we're going to get the max of those 2 lists. For this one, we have a list where the sum of everything is 8 and the sum of list 3 is 27. In this case, this function is going to return 27. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to work on that. Okay, so I see the question in the chat. Like I was referring to you when you said value in the for loop. Yeah, so value is, you could actually use anything you wanted there. Like I could say for number in list of values, for element in list of values, for a in list of values. Like this is just a word I made up. You actually don't have to use the word value here. You can use anything you want. This is, once again, just an identifier, and it's just a temporary variable used to look at each element in the list. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to give you, I'll give you 5 minutes to work on it because I'm impatient. So honestly, the timer is just as much for you as it is for me, because I have a rather large deficit in estimating time, as you can tell by my half-hour late stream. So let me give you 5 minutes to work on it. And I'll give you a little bit more than that. Give you 6 minutes. So take your time. Try to work on this. Try to work on this problem. Let me make sure I'm not blocking out the problem. Yeah, there you go. So take your time. By take your time, I mean take 5 minutes and 38 seconds and try to write this function. Okay, sorry if your ears just got blasted by a timer there. So I hope that was enough time for everyone. So please let me know if you need any more time. I also just found out that there's about a 20-second delay on the stream, so I will play around with some of the settings to see if I can decrease that latency, because apparently there are ways to do it. I just need to figure it out. Okay, so let's take a look at a solution here. So not too much. So it's not a terribly complicated solution. Doesn't really need to be. So in this one, I defined two variables, sum1 and sum2, representing the eventual sums of list 1 and list 2, respectively. So to get sum1, which is the sum of all items in list 1, I said for number in list 1, sum1 plus equals number. So basically I'm adding whatever the value of number is to sum1. So sum1 has this cumulative sum being generated. And then for sum2, I'm just doing for number in list 2 and then adding number to sum2. And then at the bottom, I actually used a built-in Python function. So Python has a ton of built-in functions. A lot of times I'm going to be asking you to just kind of like redo them from scratch because it's helpful to understand the underlying algorithmic process that it uses to figure something out. In this case, I just decided to use the built-in Python function because I'm a little, I'm mostly concerned with just getting everybody to the point where they can do something. And it would be silly to not show you kind of like a lot of the useful things that Python can do. So you just return the max of sum1 and sum2. So basically just figure out which one is bigger, and then you are good to go. So if anybody has any questions, please ask me. And yeah, I'm actually planning on doing something with Git and GitHub once I feel like everybody has a passable understanding of Python and how to build something. Because I think when I've talked to like other programmers I work with, one of the biggest issues that everybody has, including myself, is that school never taught us really how to use Git in anything more than basics. And I've never been in a coding environment that did not involve using Git, so I think it's important to always use it. So yeah, I'm gonna actually integrate that with the PyCharm lesson so that everybody can kind of get an understanding of Git. But I'll be doing one lesson that's basically just all Git stuff. Because, like when I had my internship, my mentor was basically told me one day, "Hey Chris, I think you're actually really good at coding, but you really suck at Git." And he was not wrong. About sucking at Git. I was pretty bad at it. So since then, I've actually learned a lot. And now I understand kind of like how to fully utilize its power. So anyway, let's get to it. So I'm going to just like teach you a little bit more about the Python language itself today. So let's look at some of the features. So keywords are what are called reserved words in Python. So those are words that are used by the Python language, and they mean something very specific. So for example, G-Man, if I can use your first name, brought up that, he was asking, or they were asking like, hey, like, do I have to use the word value to iterate through this loop? But it was actually just a word I made up. It doesn't have to be the word value itself, but there are certain words that you can't use, and those are keywords. So we can't use a keyword as a variable name, function name, or any other identifier. They have a specific meaning in Python, and Python interpreter will interpret them in a particular way. So in Python 3.7, there are 33 keywords. I'm not sure if there were any updates in Python 3.8, but you could certainly take a look. Here's a list of ones that I know are around, although I'm realizing that this is not 33. This is actually 35 keywords in Python. So there are at least 35 special words that you can't use to define variables or anything like that. So these are all words that are really important. And they all mean different things and have a special function. And an identifier is just a name that you give to classes, functions, variables. It's what helps you differentiate one thing from another. We've already been using identifiers. The purpose of this is just kind of to show you what some of the rules of identifiers and how to understand them and how to name things, different rules and conventions and so forth. So if we look at this code snippet from earlier, I think it was the first problem we did, the identifiers are value exists in list, lists of values, value to find, list of numbers. Those are all identifiers. They're words we made up to differentiate between several different elements of the program. The words def and print are actually built-in keywords in Python, and those have a very specific meaning. So there are some rules for writing identifiers. So they can be any combination of letters, lowercase, uppercase, digits, or and underscores. And there are several conventions that coders will typically use for writing identifiers. This is called camel case. So camel case means that you start off. So if you have like a multi-word identifier, the first word's going to start off with a lowercase letter, and then each subsequent word in that identifier is going to start with a capital letter. And then there's something called snake case. For Python, I write in snake case. I actually prefer how it looks. I've read studies that snake case is actually easier to read than camel case, although there are other programmers that will disagree with me. So whatever, use whatever you want. Just stick with one convention. That's the important part. An identifier can't start with a digit, so you can't use one var, but you could totally use var1. You can't use keywords like we talked about before, and then you can't use these special symbols. So you can't use an exclamation point, @ sign, number sign, $sign, %sign, so forth. And you've seen me write comments a lot in the code that I've showed you. So comments are text in programs that are not actually part of the executable code. And usually they're used as just notes to other programmers you might be working with. They can be used to just like label the files themselves and say what they are. They can be used to make it easier to understand something particularly complex. So if you have some code that's doing something really fancy and it's not obvious what it's doing, it can be useful to just write a comment saying, this is what this code is doing, and this is why I'm doing it. So 2 ways to write comments in Python. One is a single line comment, and you use this number sign, or honestly, it's probably just say hashtag at this point. I think cultural conventions have taken over. So you use the hashtag, and then you just put in the comment following it. And then if you want to do a multi-line comment, you can use these 3 apostrophes, also called single quotes sometimes, and you just put anything in there. And anything that's a comment will not be executed by the Python interpreter. So I just want to talk a little bit more about variables now. So you know that variables are just elements that we assign a value to. But I want to show you, so what I'm going to show you are data types. So data types are essentially, they're really important when they come to variables, although I guess it was kind of a weird presentation transition. So every value in Python has a data type of some sort. If you've ever done programming before, you're familiar with the idea of numbers being different from strings, being different from objects, being different from lists or arrays, things like that. So those are all different data types. So I'm just going to go over some of the Python data types. This is not all-inclusive, but these are the ones that I'm going to be using frequently. So the first one is called a number. So integers and floating point numbers and complex numbers, which you can use as well, fall under the Python number data type. And they're defined by the int, float, and complex class in Python. So essentially, integer, floating point, and complex are what are called subclasses of the numbers class. Don't worry about what that means yet, though. And you can use the type function to check the data type of a value or variable, which is a pretty useful one from time to time. So, for example, if we have a gets 5 and we print a is of type and then type a, we're going to get 5 is of type class int. And then 2.0 is assigned to a. When we assign 2.0 to a, 2.0 is of type class float. And basically a float, like an int is just an integer, meaning, it's mathematically, the mathematical set of all integers, which is just 0, 1, 2, 3, and then all the negative numbers too. And it goes on infinitely. Floating point number is anything that has a fractional component to it. So something like 2.3 would be a floating point number, or 0.01 would be a floating point number as well. And they're kind of weird because they actually work differently under the hood. So like, there's kind of a conventional wisdom that you never use floating points if your program has anything to do with money and it needs to be precise. Integer, when you do any sort of operations on integers, it's actually quite precise because you're really just manipulating the binary. But with floating points, you actually represent floating point numbers differently under the hood. So sometimes you'll end up getting these weird things like where you'll say 2.0 plus 1.0, and Python interpreter will give you 3.00, like 15 zeros and then a 1. So they're kind of weird. At some point, we'll talk about the difference between those. So a tuple is a data type that's used to hold elements, so it's like a list. It's basically just the exact same thing as a list, except that it's called an immutable data type. Anything that's immutable is not able to be changed later once it's defined. So with a list, we can just change a value. We can just, we could change this. If this was a list, we could change this 1 to a 10 or anything else. Tuples are immutable. Immutability is just something that's useful in programming because you don't want somebody else that's working on your code to be able to change that, because there's a reason that you shouldn't be able to change it. It can be annoying, but it's also going to save a lot of bugs later. So for example, we could say tuple of number 0, we'll get 1. Tuple of numbers 3, we'll get whatever's at index 3, which is 10, and then 0 to 2, we can get the slice from 0 to 2, which is just going to be 1, 4, because the 2 index is not inclusive. So like you might see some tuples at some point. I will almost definitely be using lists 90% of the time. There would have to be a special reason I'm using tuples. Let's talk about strings a little bit. So strings are just blocks of characters. I'm actually going to be covering strings a little bit later in this lesson, but I want to move on to another concept, but we're going to be doing a deeper dive into strings in a little bit. I also just realized that there's beats playing. Sorry. So I will turn that off, unless people like it. So there are some conventions and rules for defining variables. So constant and variable name, and so most of these are actually conventions, meaning that they are not needed, but they are something that Python programmers follow as a universal convention. And it's really good to just make sure that you're doing what most other programmers are doing in this regard, because it keeps code consistent, it keeps the styling consistent, and that makes it much easier to follow. So you want to use names that describe the variable. So I've actually been told sometimes that like my variable names are actually a bit too descriptive, in the sense that like they're actually too long and unwieldy. So I'm a little too far on that end of things, but a lot of programmers, especially when starting out, tend to be on this side of things, where every time they need a variable, they'll just type a letter, gets a value, and never do something like this. This is pretty much impossible to read, especially when you have like 10 variables that you're trying to follow in the course of a program. So just make sure that whatever you're doing, you're trying to describe it as much as possible. So for example, n equals 10 is bad, but number to count to gets 10 is a much better way to describe it. If a variable has more than one word, I'm going to just like kind of outline the convention here that we use snake case. Most of the time when I see Python code, people use snake case, although sometimes people will use camel case, which I'm not a fan of, but it's important with that whatever code base you're working on, you're being consistent with everybody else. whenever you define a constant, so a constant is just something that has a specific value and it's not going to change. So for example, pi would be a good one. Maybe you need pi in your program, so we just define pi as, approximately 3.14, and then maybe we need the acceleration of gravity, so we'll define that as 9.8 or negative 9.8, depending on what your program is doing. But the idea is that you can use these later, and it's much easier to read in your code like pi times radius squared rather than like 3.14 times radius squared. It's much nicer to just have these conventional constant names that we can just refer to later. Which is just what I'm talking about here. So there's actually no official way to declare a constant in Python. So most languages actually let you say things like, this is a constant and this cannot be changed. There's no real way to do that in Python. There's no keyword for constants. As far as I'm aware, I don't think there is. But it's a good convention to use because it just makes it much easier to read through code and debug things. So now let's actually talk more about strings. Strings are blocks of characters that are surrounded by either single apostrophes or single quotes or double quotation marks. Strings are technically arrays, which consist of consists of a bunch of bytes representing Unicode characters. So there's a concept called character sets that you'll have on different operating systems. So there is ASCII, and there's Unicode 16, and there's Unicode 32, and they basically just, the different character sets will just have either different characters or more characters than another one. So a lot of times, for example, if you're typing in Japanese or Mandarin or something, you will have to use a more robust character set because the more simple character sets won't include them. But yeah, don't worry too much about those. But since essentially strings are, I said lists, I meant arrays. Slightly different meaning. I want to make sure I'm being consistent. Okay. So since strings are arrays, oh, geez. Sorry. You can manipulate them like you would arrays as well. Getting part of a string is called slicing. So for example, let's say I have this constant string city name with the value Baltimore. So if I say city name 0, that's going to print out the first character in Baltimore, which is B. The first 4 characters are city name 04, so that's going to slice and give you the first 4 characters in that string, which are BALT. And then the whole string is just Baltimore, city name. Pretty simple, but you'll be working with strings quite a lot, so it's important to understand kind of the underlying features. And I'm going to throw a bunch of functions that are specific to strings at you, so hopefully some of them stick, because they're all really useful. This is the same as just lists and any other data structure. Len str returns the length of the string or how many characters are in that string. If you say so, by the way, in all these examples, the string that I'm manipulating is called str. Str.strip will return the string str without any white space at the front or the end. So a lot of times, when people do any sort of user input, if you're entering something into a text field, people will write a space or they'll add another space to the end of their input. So a lot of times stripping user input is just something you need to do to make sure to give people a good user experience. Str.lower returns the string str with all capital letters converted to lowercase, and vice versa. String.upper returns the string str with all capital letters converted to uppercase. So let's say we have this string city name and it's just Baltimore, Maryland, and there's a bunch of space before Baltimore and after Maryland. Baltimore is all uppercase, Maryland is all lowercase. So if we say print city name, we're just going to get what the string looks like naturally, how we defined it. If we say print length str, then we're going to get 23, which is the total number of characters in city name. If we try to print str.strip, we're going to get the string without all the white space. str.lower is going to give you just the string, but Baltimore is now all lowercase. And if we just do str.upper, now Maryland is all uppercase. A couple more that are quite useful are replace, which you pass two strings as arguments, so string 1 and string 2. And str.replace will return an instance of str with all, or it will return str with all instances of string 1 replaced with string 2. And then str.split, character to split, it splits the string str into substrings using character to split as the separator by which it determines what to split by. So if we have this message, hello, comma, world, if we print the message, we're just going to get hello world, nothing interesting. If we print message.replace hello howdy, Python will find all instances of hello, which is, we have one, which is right here, and replace it with the string howdy. So then we get howdy world. And then if we say message.split comma, we're essentially just going to get a list of all the elements in the string that were separated by commas. So we end up getting this 2-element list that is hello and world, because it's splitting by the comma, and it's just going to take everything between the commas, or before the first comma and after the last comma, and split it into a list. Split is a really useful one. I wish most languages had more of a nice split function like Python does. And then there's another amazingly powerful data structure that can help you solve a lot of problems called a dictionary. And a dictionary is also referred to, like in Java, this is essentially a hash map. And dictionaries are an unordered collection of key value pairs. So for example, let's say I have a dictionary called student grades. So we have Zara with a 90, Yorma with an 82, Vivian with a 96, and Xylophone with a 71 because he needs help. And the idea is that each of the names of the students are the keys, and then the value follows the colon after the key. So essentially, Zara is the key to 90, Yorma is the key to 82, Vivian is the key to 96, Xylophone is the key to the value 71. So if we print student grades, we're just going to get this dictionary here. And then let's say we print student grades Zara. So we're essentially saying what value corresponds to the key Zara in the dictionary student grades, in which case we'll print out 90. And then let's say Xylophone starts doing a little bit better, and Xylophone's grade goes up to 81. We can say student grades Xylophone gets 81, and then when we print student grades, you'll see that Xylophone is now a key to the value 81 in the dictionary student grades. So quite a cool data structure, used quite a lot. So now I'm going to give you, two practice problems. So don't cheat because I clearly just looked at the the answer there. So you're going to write a function that returns true if a string passes a parameter begins and ends with the same character. So if we have begin, end, same, we pass str. Okay, I meant to put something here, but essentially begin, end, same radar is going to return true because the string begins with R and ends with R. And begin, end, same Baltimore is going to return false because B and E are not equal. So this one isn't, I think this one's not too tricky. I think everybody will be able to do it. So let me give you about 5 minutes to work on it. Okay, so hopefully everybody had enough time to work on that. Let's go over the answer. So for this one, there's a very simple solution. In this case, you can just say return str0, which is going to be the first character at the 0th index of the string, is equal to string length of string minus 1, which is essentially going to give you the index of the last character in the string. So if both of those are equal, then we're going to return true. Otherwise, we're going to return false. So just remember, like, this whole thing is a Boolean expression that is going to return either true or false. So the if-else is actually not needed. But if you did if-else, that's totally fine as well. So for example, if we do begin, end, same, ABA. Okay, I just made a typo. But basically, like, this is going to return true. These will both return true. So hopefully you were able to get a working solution for that. And then I'm going to give you one last coding problem, and then I'm going to assign just a small coding assignment that we're going to be building on throughout the week. So for this one, I want you to write a function that takes in a list, or it takes in a string, and it's going to return how many vowels are in that string. There's several ways you can do this. There are actually, I can think of at least 3 different ways just off the top of my head of how you could do this. Do it any way you want. So A, B, C, D, F, count vowels. If we pass A, B, C, D, F into that, we're going to get 2 because there are 2 vowels in A, B, C, D, E, F, A, and E. And if we say count vowels Baltimore, we're going to get 4 because there are 1, 2, 3, 4 vowels in the string Baltimore. So I'm going to give you, I'll just give you another 5 minutes to work on this. If you would like more time, just let me know. I'm happy to provide more time as well. Okay. Hopefully that was enough time for you guys to work on this. So let's check the answer. So for my answer, I actually used the in keyword, which is one of my favorite keywords in Python. You can do a lot of really slick stuff with this. So the first thing I did is I just said string str gets str.lower, just to make sure that all we care about is how many vowels there are. We don't care whether it's uppercase or lowercase. So I started off with count equal to 0. And I said for letter in str, so we're essentially having that value letter take on each of the characters in string. So if letter, whatever we're looking at, is in this list here, A, E, I, O, U, then we're going to increase count by 1. So essentially, we're going to iterate through string. We're going to look at each letter. And if letter happens to be in this whole list here, A, E, I, O, U, we're just going to increment that vowel count by 1. And then we're just going to return count. So that's all you have to do for this one. Pretty simple. There are a lot of other ways to do it. You could also just say if letter is equal to A, or letter is equal to E, or letter is equal to I, or letter is equal to O, or letter is equal to U, increment count by 1. That also works just fine. All right, so now I am going to give you an assignment. I posted it on the classroom website. It's a pretty simple one, and the idea is that we're actually going to be building on top of this to make it a more interesting program as we go along. So let me open up the assignment. Also, you can't see that, so let me just... There we go. So for this assignment, it's a pretty simple one. You're just going to be writing some code that plays one round of rock, paper, scissors. I assume everybody is familiar with this game. If you are not, please let me know. I am happy to help you learn. So I want you to start off with this code here. Or actually, even if you don't really want to start off with this code, if you have another way to make this program work, that's totally fine too. But this is just a way I recommend you to get started. And the output of the program is just going to look like this. You're just going to get some, there's going to be some output to the console. It's going to say enter rock, paper, or scissors. You enter in what you want to choose. It can be rock, paper, or scissors. It'll say, player chose whatever you put in. The computer chooses something randomly, and then you just determine who wins. So at the end, you'll say player wins, computer wins, or tie. This is a pretty simple one. We're going to set it up so that it's a lot more complex, like later in the week, though. So, but this should be something that you can do. If you want to do it now, I'm just going to stick around and just do a couple things on my own. And I'm willing to help, or you can just send me messages in the chat or any other way that's useful to you. And then, just let me know. But turn this in. I didn't grade a couple of the first coding assignments. I'm actually just finishing those up now. I will keep up with those in the future. Everything's been rather crazy and busy, so keeping up with everything has been difficult. And yeah, Josh, I noticed that you did actually complete the assignment, so so that was so yeah. Now you got it taken care of. And yes, Jacob, I totally did do this in Java when we did this in high school. It actually just turns out it's a really good program to start off with because it forces you to use a bunch of control flows and features of languages. So yeah, we're just going to start off with this. So feel free to ask questions, stick around. But for now, that's the end of today's lecture. Thank you for joining me, and stay safe, stay inside, stay healthy, do some coding. It's a good time to learn Python. And also, it's really fun for me to teach these, to be honest. It's good to have something to do that's not just my regular job. So, yeah, thanks for joining, everybody, and have fun. All right, I'm going to sign off. If anybody has any questions, feel free to send me a message, email, whatever is most convenient for you. And yeah, thanks for joining. See y'all later.